Today we're going to be talking about Joseph and the story we read from Genesis 37 just to get us started. But I want to begin today by thanking everyone who's been praying for my family as we've been trying to find the best care options for my dad and his dementia. So we thank God that last week we were able to find a place. He goes there tomorrow. It's about a 3-hour drive for my mum at this point, but the prospect that he'll be able to move closer to her later on. And so we're continuing to pray that he'll have a smooth transition into the nursing home, because obviously he has limited recognition of what's going on, and that can be a little disturbing. Now, if you don't know much about me, I have 6 siblings in my family. So a total of 7. And I know that some of you are saying, is that all? All I can say is God bless your mother. And some of you are saying, wow, how many minivans did your family need? So it is above average, right? Let's just settle on that, okay? There's some, it's not a world record, but it is above average. And on top of that, all of us are quite spread out. So at times like this, it's a little difficult to have conversations. Thankfully, we live with Zoom. Before that, it was Skype, email. Like, there are so many ways to stay in contact other than handwriting a letter and putting it on a steamboat, to get there next month. So it really is very helpful. But if you can go to my clicker isn't working, so if you can go to the next slide back there, thanks. So this is, just to give you an idea, this is Australia. I don't know, it's a bit of a funny map, so just ignore the states and everything, but the shape is correct. Down the bottom where the star is where I grew up. It's where my mother continues to live in Tasmania. And the 1 means that I have 1 sibling that lives there right now, and she's had her hands full. Thankfully, she's a trained nurse, and so that seemed providential. Down the bottom of the state of Tasmania, you'll see another 1. That's where my brother is, and that's where vaguely in that area where my dad will be moving. But then there's 2 more across the water in Melbourne. 1 more up in Sydney as you go up the coast. Of course, there's me off the map there. And another click will bring us to my last youngest sister, who earlier this year decided to take her family in a camper van and just go wherever. So she's out there somewhere, but is still able to Zoom, be on all our chats and everything, and involved in making these decisions. So that's been really good. One of the things that I'm really thankful for in this situation is that ever since my dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease several years ago, I can't recall a significant agreement among us kids as we work through all the care and all the financial options ahead of us. And I know that that's a little unusual in a good way, right? It's not that we always agree on everything. We've got a long history of not agreeing on things. But in this instance, we were able to work well together. Because we understand how it works, right? It doesn't take 7 people to have 7 different ideas for the whole place to become a mess, right? For everything to break down, for relationships to be broken. All it takes is 1 person who's very determined to be different from everyone else, and that can cause all sorts of problems. Right? And so when we talk about our sermon topic today. It's difficult because that one person can sometimes be right. Okay. And they can be taking a stand because everybody's wrong. They usually take a stand because they believe everybody else is wrong. Right? And so it's where that can be difficult. And how do we navigate that? How do we decide if we are the one person who's right or we're the one person who's wrong? Right? What if we're outvoted 6-1? Right? It just takes that one person to disrupt the unity, the harmony, the working relationship that takes place. So whether it's a family, whether it's a work situation or wherever, we understand that dynamic, don't we? That we don't need 7 opinions to be different to create confusion. We just need one. If that one is determined enough. And it can be very, very disruptive. Joseph's family, you can take that off the screen now. Joseph's family had it a little more difficult than mine did. You see, Joseph's family, Joseph's father, Jacob, or sometimes he's called Israel, he played favorites within his family. Okay? Not just a little bit, a lot. He had a favorite wife. Okay? Now, you can only have a favorite wife. Well, we should all have favorite wives, guys. But he had a favorite wife. He also had a less favorite wife. Okay? And you might say, well, I understand the problem here. And that is certainly not a good start. And if you go back and read the story of how he ended up with, actually it wasn't just a wife, it was the sister, right? 2 sisters. He's married to 2 sisters. And that didn't go well. But when you have a favorite wife, in this instance, it led to him having a favorite son, Joseph, because Joseph was the firstborn son of the favorite wife. Now, Joseph wasn't always the easiest person to get along with. Right? You see, Joseph, I think today, we would describe him as being someone of privilege. Okay? He was someone of privilege. And so he was the favored son, and he knew that. And I'm not saying he intentionally rubbed it into everyone else's face. He may have. But, for instance, his dad gave him, above all others, a beautiful coat, right? And he wore it. Did he have to wear it? Now, it doesn't tell us how he walked while he was wearing this coat. But I'm imagining that there was a little strut to his walk, right? He wasn't head down shuffling his feet. No, he's the favorite son of the favorite wife, of the patriarch of the family. And so Joseph doesn't seem to always make peace his first objective. He was also blessed by God to receive dreams. And later on in his story, this sort of interpreting dreams is going to become really important for him, this gift that God gives him. But as a teenager, as a young man, when Joseph receives these dreams, and these dreams show his family bowing down to him, he very tactfully, I'm sure, goes and tells them about it. Okay? You don't make friends when you're predicting that you've had a dream from God that they're going to bow down to you. Okay? One day, because you know what? Not only am I the favorite son of the favorite wife, of the patriarch of the family, I must be God's favorite son too. Right? Good luck to the rest of you. I'll try to be benevolent. Okay? And so, Joseph has a lot of privilege. The other, in our story that we read, that part of his life, the other brothers are sent out to the fields to care for the sheep. Did Joseph go with them? Was he camping with them? Was he out there in the elements? Was he chasing the lambs? He's back in the camp until he needs to go and take them a message. So, when his brothers get the opportunity, they take it. They grab their least favorite brother and sell him as a slave to some merchants traveling to Egypt. A little extreme, perhaps. But this is where the story takes us. It's the story we read from Genesis 37. And there's Joseph heading down to Egypt. No privilege, no favorite. No one knows who he is. So I want you to just stop for a minute and think. He's been sold as a slave. And although his father is wealthy, Joseph isn't able to buy his freedom. He doesn't have that wealth, doesn't have the platinum American Express card in his wallet. There's nothing he can do about it. And so shortly after arriving in Egypt, he's framed for a crime. I'm giving you the short version, and thrown into jail. He doesn't just stay in jail for a little while. He stays in jail for several years. And it wasn't a jail like we would find here in the United States. This is an Egyptian jail 5,000 years ago. Now, although they built the pyramids, their record on human rights was a little shaky. Right? The Egyptian jail 5,000 years ago wasn't a place that anyone would want to be. I'm sure that many people went in and didn't come out. If he ever thought about his brothers in that time, I wonder what sort of thoughts he might have thought. Now, God does some tremendous things for Joseph. And he works to get Joseph released from jail. But he doesn't just get released from jail. This is literally a rags to riches story, where through his gift of interpreting dreams, he's elevated out of the prison to the right hand of Pharaoh. He's placed in charge of Pharaoh's treasury. Of Pharaoh's treasury in that day would have included gathering in the wheat, the food, the resources, overseeing all of that, not just counting gold coins. And so he's in charge of the distribution of food. Having been warned in a dream that there's going to be a great drought, Joseph goes about administering this food in a way that will be sustainable. He knows that there'll be 7 good years followed by 7 bad years, and so he stores up in the 7 years. He budgets so that it will last until the end of the bad years. Now, because of the drought, it wasn't just in Egypt, it was regional. His brothers, who lived sort of up the coast in the land of Canaan, eventually find their way to Egypt. Egypt was the only country with an excess supply of food in the middle of the drought. And I wonder at this point if Joseph had been looking for them. If Joseph had been saying, I wonder, are my brothers, are my family going to need food? I wonder if they'll be one of the people that come in, because no doubt there were people coming from surrounding countries to buy whatever food they could. And I wonder if he was on the lookout. We're not told that. But Genesis chapter 42 and verse 8 tells us that when they come to buy the food, Joseph is there, he's overseeing this process, and it says, although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. And it makes sense, really, because Joseph, no doubt, is dressed as an Egyptian. He speaks Egyptian. He has his hair styled like an Egyptian. He is the prince of Egypt. Right? They're not expecting their brother. Then it's not even on their radar that they could possibly encounter him in the royal court of Egypt. And I believe that Joseph now struggles with how to handle this situation. He gives his brothers the grain that they're seeking. We might say, well, that's kind of him. And it is. But he also plays games with them. He demands that if they come in the future, they must bring his youngest brother, Benjamin. You see, his mother only had 2 sons, Joseph and Benjamin. If Joseph was the favorite son of the favorite wife, and Joseph isn't there anymore, who do you think might now be the favorite son of the favorite wife? It's Benjamin. When their brothers go back and they tell their dad, hey, they said if we want more food, we've got to take Benjamin with us. He's like, no. Benjamin does not leave this camp. Right? He's my favorite son, and I'm not letting him out of my sight. Okay? But Joseph says, no, I want to see Benjamin. He doesn't tell them who he is yet. But you can imagine the pressure that's put on these 10 brothers. Because they know their dad's feelings towards Benjamin. And they know that this food probably may not last them throughout the drought, throughout the famine. And so they have to go back and lay out the conditions to their father of what's going to happen if they want more food. And so you can imagine the journey back that should be filled with joy of, oh, we have our food, is sort of filled with a dread of how they're going to break the news to their father Jacob. In addition to that, not only did he say, I need you to bring Benjamin back with you, he actually kept one of the brothers, Simeon. Where do you suppose he kept him? Perhaps in the same jail that he had himself spent all that time? Okay. Now, Simeon volunteered for it, so, But he said, I'm going to keep one of you. Because I'm not giving you a choice, really. If you want Simeon back, you'll come back. You'll buy your grain from me, and you'll bring Benjamin with you. And then on top of that, when they get home, they find in their bags, in the sacks of grain, money. The same money that they've paid, 100%. What do you think when you see that? Do you praise God and say He's good? Or do you worry that there might be some chariots coming over the hill any time now? I don't know what's going on. They don't know what's going on. Only Joseph knows what's going on. But so far, he's making an impression on these brothers, and it's not a good one. Eventually, Jacob is forced to send Benjamin back to Egypt. And they come and they say, here he is. And so, okay, Simeon comes out of jail. That's good. Everybody's together. They still don't know who Joseph is, and Joseph still doesn't tell them. And now he says, okay, here's your food. And he sends them back. Only this time they're not just worried about chariots coming behind them, there actually are chariots coming behind them. And they come and they look through, and they're not looking for coins or refunded money. They're looking for Joseph's prized goblet. It's silver. In all likelihood, it had something to do with like divination or something. It was really important to him, not just his favorite coffee mug. And so they go through all the bags looking for this. And of course they find it. No prizes for guessing whose bag it's in. Of course it's in Benjamin's. Now at this point, if they'd given blood pressure tests to each of the brothers, do you think they're going to pass or fail? Right? Benjamin's being framed for stealing the prized goblet of the second in command in Egypt. He threatens then to make Joseph threatens to make Benjamin his slave. He says, okay, the rest of you can go, but Benjamin stays here with me. And if they were panicking before, they're through the roof now. Right? If they go back, their dad's going to die. He can't lose his two favorite sons. And it's only after all of this, these, however you want to describe them, some people describe them as tests, as justifiable tests. For me, they're sort of mean games that he plays with them, mind games. But at this point, Joseph finally breaks down, and he reveals himself, his identity, as their long-lost brother. And in Genesis chapter 45, we can put this slide up, we see here Joseph's joy at being reunited with his family. Next slide as well, thanks. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said to them, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt, and now do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler of all Egypt." What do you say at a time like that? I don't know if you're the brothers, I don't know what you say. Okay. Do you think they're happy? Do you think they're scared? Yeah. I mean, Joseph's words are attempts to be reassuring here, aren't they? He says in verse 5, "Do not be distressed." Okay. Don't be angry with yourselves for selling me. He says God's been able to work this out. You'll notice that Joseph doesn't ignore or overlook the terrible things these brothers did to him. He confronts them with it, but he's reached a point in life where he can see God redeeming all that he suffered. Okay? Joseph still suffered. Right? Joseph went through hardship. It hasn't been easy for him. But God has redeemed it. And so Joseph at this point, and I don't know when this changed, I don't know when he did, what happened, if there was a specific thing, if he just, it was long enough that he just had to tell them. But he this is the moment. And it seems that his attitude is very different from when he's having his servants put the goblet into Benjamin's sack, right? What he's trying to accomplish is something very different at this point, because he's reassuring to his brothers. He no longer wants to keep any of them in jail. He no longer plays with their fears. Instead, he invites them to come to Egypt. There's 5 years of famine. Don't just come down here with your camels and whatever and get the grain and then go back and then come again the next. He says, come down here and live with me, near me. Enjoy my food. Enjoy the safety of Egypt. I believe the only way that Joseph could have done this was through his faith in God. You notice in his sort of reveal speech here how central to that God is. He doesn't just say, hey, it's all right, water under the bridge, it's been a long time, things worked out all right for me, I forgive you. Right? He says, no, what you did was wrong. You should be angry with yourselves, but it's okay, let me explain. God was doing something. God sent me ahead of you. God is using me to save lives. Okay? It's his faith in God that sees a bigger picture. And it's when he sees that bigger picture that he's able to say to his brothers, it still wasn't okay what you did to me. And he doesn't use the word forgive, but I think his actions demonstrate that he forgives them for that. He's willing to have them come and eat at his table and live near him. He wants to give them safety. And I believe that it's his relationship and trust in God that allows him to reach that point of forgiveness. You see, God, we're not trying to say that God somehow approved or wanted Joseph sold into slavery, but that God was able to use the sinfulness of the brothers and the hurt that Joseph received in a way to still accomplish his purpose. And so as I close, I want to make 4 observations about forgiveness. If we can click the slide, and we'll go through these one at a time. The first one is that forgiveness is a choice that sets us free from the bondage of bitterness and resentment. Okay? You see, forgiveness certainly has the potential to restore a relationship between people. But the only person in that relationship that we control is ourselves. Okay? Sometimes the other person doesn't want to be forgiven. Sometimes the other person doesn't think they need to be forgiven. Sometimes the other person just doesn't want to see you anymore. Right? Sometimes they think you're the one that was in the wrong. So there's all sorts of ways that forgiveness on our part can still not lead to a restored relationship. But the first consequence is that when we reach a point in our lives of being able to forgive someone who's hurt us, someone who's offended us in some way, is that it sets us free from bitterness. It sets us free from anger and resentment that we have towards them. And I believe that we see this in Joseph. In chapter 45 and verse 2, so Joseph makes himself known to his brothers, the verse before, and then in verse 2, he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph, the dam has burst. I believe it's the bitterness. I believe it's the resentment. I believe it's the harm that he held towards the bad feelings that he held towards his brothers. That it becomes too great. And he breaks down. And the relief that he feels from that moment of saying, let's start over, is expressed in those tears, that the weeping that is so loud that it's heard outside the house, and the distress is so great that people go and tell Pharaoh about it. And it's when Joseph composes himself after that he gives the speech that we see on the screen. And so the first thing that forgiveness does is it brings relief to the person who forgives. If we go to next point on this next slide, is that it allows for the possibility of reconciliation and restoration of broken relationships. Okay? That's a long way of saying forgiveness is a prerequisite of peacemaking. Right? If you're holding someone against something against someone, it's really hard to be at peace with them. Right? At least as we defined peace last week, as wholeness, as completeness, as putting things back together again. Right, there may not be conflict between us, right? I saw Ed kick a golf ball out of the bushes, and he didn't count it, right? And I've been holding on to that, because I haven't played with Ed for many years. Okay? But I can't be reconciled to him. Not really. I mean, it's sort of there. It's going to impact our relationship. I may not bring it up, but until I say, okay, my score wasn't going to win anyway, right? Ed won by more than one stroke. And until I come to peace with that, until I'm willing to forgive him for that errant kick, that was probably accidental, right? So until I come to terms with that and forgive him, Ed and I aren't really going to have peace. We may just avoid each other. And so forgiveness allows for the possibility of reconciliation and restoration. The next one says that forgiveness shifts the focus from seeking revenge to embracing compassion and love. Okay. So rather than thinking, it's our thought process here, right? Rather than thinking, how am I going to get back at that person? We can click the next slide, or next point. How am I going to get even? Then I'm not really thinking about what's best for that other person. Right? Getting even is not possible as also thinking about what's best for the other person. Of thinking about how I can love that other person. And so forgiveness shifts that focus. I have several friends who've, for whatever reason, have broken relationships with someone. And the way they've described the healing process is that for like 30 days, or thereabouts, they pray for the other person. And not the sort of prayer, and I know that there are these prayers in the Psalms, not the sort of prayer that, their house would fall down and they would be under the bottom of the rubble, right? So not that sort of praying for the other person, but actually praying for the good of the other person. And after the 30 days of prayer for that person, that you may still not have forgiven, but as you've gone through that discipline and think about what's good for that person, then the focus shifts from revenge to compassion to love and caring for that person. Because it takes the Holy Spirit, I believe, in a lot of instances to be able to forgive. And forgiveness shifts that focus. And the last thing I have here as we go to the next point is that forgiveness acknowledges that God can work through even the most painful circumstances to bring about good. So it says, yeah, it was painful. It doesn't deny the pain. It says it was painful, whatever this event is. And so, but it says, Joseph was able to forgive his brothers. Because he says, as horrible as this was, as hard as this was, as much as this hurt, God's still able to accomplish something from it. and to use it for good. I don't know if maybe I'm going out on a limb here, but I wonder if most of us don't have someone in our past, in our lives, in the present, that we haven't forgiven. Because sometimes forgiving is hard. Sometimes forgiving takes time. Was Joseph ready? I don't believe Joseph was ready to forgive when he saw his brothers. It had been years since they'd thrown him into jail. He'd had 7 years of prosperity serving in Pharaoh's palace. He'd had 2 years of famine serving in... He'd had 9 years since he'd been in jail. How did he treat his brothers when they came to visit? He messed with their minds, right? Until it came to a point that he just couldn't keep it going anymore. And so, I think for many of us, there's those people there, the time by itself doesn't heal those hurts. It often takes a decision on our part. I'm not suggesting that we put ourselves in danger, that we go back into a dangerous place or relationship, but we need to be aware, we need to be alert, but at the same time, we need to be careful that those things don't destroy us over the long term. And so all of this brings us to a point today that says God chose love in his relationship with us. You can bring up the last slide. God chose love in his relationship with us. God, and we know that because God chose forgiveness. God chose not to take vengeance. Now, I know that there are instances and verses that talk about God taking vengeance. Okay, we can look forward and we can say, look, there's eternal punishment that's out there that's going that we want to avoid. Okay, consequences when we do the wrong things, but God still chose forgiveness. Next slide. God chose not to take vengeance each time we sin, right? So yeah, it's out there, but it's not as though it's going to happen each time we sin. Can you imagine if each time we did something wrong, God said, nope, that's no good. I've got to take vengeance. You've insulted me. You've hurt me. You've broken my heart. Slap, 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 slap. Like a slap from God isn't going to leave us in good shape, is it? God chose not to do that because God has something bigger planned. God forgives because God is a peacemaker. God is the peacemaker that we all model ourselves after. And if you're not confident in the forgiveness you've received, if you're not confident in your relationship with God, then please take this opportunity to talk with me afterwards, to talk with someone else. Because that's who God is. Joseph was, I believe, a flawed peacemaker, a flawed forgiver. I'm a flawed forgiver. Right? But God forgives. God left heaven, came to earth so that he could forgive. It's at the center of our story because God is a peacemaker. And when we follow in his footsteps, blessed are the peacemakers.